President Trump began his second term in the White House exactly 1 year ago today. And since then, he has reshaped the United States' role in the international community through his policies and through a number of significant diplomatic and military actions. And this includes imposing tariffs on imports from Mexico, Canada and China. A highly contentious White House meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, you may remember, announcing sweeping tariffs on dozens of nations and striking nuclear facilities in Iran. Now, a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska is also an accomplishment. Strikes on alleged drug boats linked to Venezuela, as we've been reporting for months. He brokered a peace plan for Gaza and, of course, captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. But what does all of this mean about what comes next? Let's bring Michael O'Hanlon now. He is the Director of Research for Brookings Foreign Policy Program and the author of To Dare Might Things, U.S. Defense Strategy Since the Revolution. I may have messed that title up. Correct me if I'm wrong. Michael, good morning. Great to be with you. And I wanted to begin with Gaza, the historic ceasefire deal there. Do you get the sense that this may in fact hold? And what do you make of President Trump's Board of Peace appointees? He messaged overnight he wants to include Vladimir Putin.
Good morning. And yes, it's nice to be with you. And it's called To Dare Mighty Things, which comes after a Theodore Roosevelt quote, which is a good way to answer your question, because Trump is trying to be a peacemaker, just as Roosevelt brokered peace with Russia and Japan and won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. But of course, Roosevelt is also notorious and well known for a big naval buildup and for the phrase, speak softly, but carry a big stick. That's where the analogy seems to break down, because obviously Trump does not speak softly. The Gaza idea is fantastic, but it has very little traction right now. It's true that there isn't an ongoing high-level, intense military operation by Israel any longer, and that Hamas has been greatly weakened because of Israel's own actions. But this idea of having an international peace implementation force move into Gaza is not happening. No one's volunteered for that. Israel's rejecting the basic composition of the oversight board that Trump's proposed. And so I'm afraid this one, however nobly intended, and however much I might want to hope that it works, is not yet anywhere near where it needs to be.
Forget about Ukraine. Before being elected, while campaigning, President Trump repeatedly promised to end that war before his first day in office was up. Let's just look back at that pledge.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office shortly after we win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled, and we will restore, as we had just 4 years ago, peace through strength. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office shortly after we win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled. We're going to get it settled and stop the death. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president.
How close might the president be to achieving that pledge?
Well, I'm afraid, of course, the year speaks for itself. And he said it would be a day. He couldn't even get it done in a year, but I'm not surprised. This war has very deep roots in Vladimir Putin's mentality and outlook towards the world. And because the war was already 3 years old when Trump took office, for Putin, that did not mean that it was time to end the war. It meant that the costs were already so great that he had to win it. In other words, the psychological imperative of somehow justifying all the loss and all the catastrophe for a conflict that Putin thought was going to take a week or two. The fact that it took more than 1,000 days before Trump came back to office means that for Putin, there's no point in settling it. He's just going to double down and keep after it. I'll give Trump credit. I think his overall policy is now roughly in the right general ballpark. We haven't yet put enough pressure on Russia, but at least Trump has stopped blaming Zelensky for the war, and he's added some sanctions against countries that trade with Russia. He's worked with Europe to make sure that Ukraine gets the weapons it needs, and he's tried very hard at the peace process. So on all those points, Trump's, I think, improved and wound up in an okay place for the moment. But the war goes on, and I'm afraid it will probably continue for much, if not all, of 2026.
All right, the author of To Dare Mighty Things, Michael O'Hanlon. We appreciate your insight and joining us this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, another big agenda item during the first year of President Trump's second term, and you all know this, has been tariffs. He has used levies against countries that have opposed his economic and national security policies and priorities. A new study by economists at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy shows just how much revenue these tariffs have generated over the past year, and more crucially, who has paid for them. Now, their researchers found 96% of all tariff burden was passed on to American importers. So out of $200 billion in tariff revenue collected by the U.S. last year, and you see it right next to me, Americans paid about $192 billion of that, which includes wholesalers, retailers, manufacturers, and direct consumers. The remaining 4%, or $8 billion, came from foreign exporters losing profits on those tariffed items. Now, the study also found that exporters in other countries are not changing prices to adjust for the tariffs. Instead, volumes of the items exported to the U.S. dropped. We have an example right next to me. When researchers looked at India, which has a 50% tariff rate, keep in mind, shipments fell up to 24% when compared to other countries without those taxes. And it's important to note, so far, importers and manufacturers have paid the bulk of these tariff costs, apparently without passing them on to the average consumer. But there have been some increases in average prices. A Harvard Business School study from November showed tariffs increased inflation by 0.7% since March, and that imported goods were about 6% more expensive than back in 2024. And while the U.S. tariff policy changed significantly last year, some of these adjustments could be undone, keep in mind, by the Supreme Court. It is expected to rule soon in a case brought by small businesses challenging the legality of President Trump's tariffs.